Okay, hi. So my name is Victor, and today I will be introducing my midterm evaluation, which is the modern web development. So here is an overview of what I will talk about in order. So first, I will give you a big picture of how a modern web app will work. Then I'll discuss the front-end technology, including HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, JavaScript, DOM, and React. So after that, we will move to the backend section of the Node.js, Express, followed by database such as MongoDB. Okay. Oh, also, I will cover the overall, after I cover the overall architecture, I will focus on the REST API and how it will connect the front end and back end together. So in a global picture, so let's begin with the overall workflow. So imagine that you are a user. Let me take an example like that when you open a website, let's say a restaurant founder. So the first thing that your browser download is the HTML document. And then the HTML document will define the structure of the web page by creating uh, headings, buttons, images, forms, etc. Then next, CSS and Bootstrap will apply and improve the appearance, the style of the web page, so that it looks better. And then CSS controls something such as colors, font spacing, margins, and basically the layout of the website. Whereas Bootstrap provides reusable components, responsive layouts, of course, and it will, which means to adapt to different screen sizes. So once the page is displayed, JavaScript will make the web page interactive. So instead of simply showing like static information, the user can, for example, now click on buttons, type into search boxes, and interact with different UI and elements. So behind the scenes, uh, JavaScript work with something called DOM, the document object model. So the DOM represents every HTML element as objects, allowing JavaScript to read and modify web page content in a dynamic way. However, directly manipulating the DOM becomes difficult when the application grows larger. So this is where React comes in. So React will organize the interface into reusable components and use the DOM to efficiently update only the part of the web page that actually changes. So for example, so if the user search for pizza, so React only update the restaurant list instead of refreshing the entire web page. Okay. Let's talk about API. So when the front end needs data, React use the fetch API to send something called a HTTP request to the backend. So the backend is built using Express, which receives the request and then performs some logic that is needed and then communicates with the database, which is MongoDB in this case. And so MongoDB stores all the restaurant information such as uh, maybe the restaurant name, the restaurant rating, cuisines, addresses, for example. So after retrieving the data from the database, Express will send it back to the front end in JSON format, since MongoDB is a JSON format database. So finally, React, which is the front end, receives the JSON response, and it will update the web page automatically. So this is basically the entire workflow of all the technologies I've shown here, I explained. So going into front-end development. So let's take a closer look at HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. So we first in this class, we learned HTML, which is responsible for the structure of the web page. It defines headings, paragraphs, buttons, forms, images, links, and all these. We also learn about semantic elements such as header, main, and footer, which it works the same, but it will improve the accessibilities and help search engines better understand the content. So next to CSS. So CSS controls the visual appearance of the web page. So it changes colors, fonts, margins, spacing, layouts, as I mentioned earlier. Of course, and more advanced, it will be the animations. So during this course, we learned about flex boxes, grid, which makes a more complex, which can make a more complex page layout much easier to build. And introducing Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a CSS framework that provides many pre-built components, so including buttons, navigation bars, cards, tables, and forms. So these are already pre-built, so we don't have to build from scratch. So it makes it a lot simpler for CSS users to make style changes to the website. So going to JavaScript. So while HTML and CSS allow us to build beautiful web pages, but they are static, so they are not dynamic web pages. So user cannot do any interactions with the web page. So JavaScript solves this problem, making the web page more interactive. So for example, when a user clicks on a button, submits a form, or search for a restaurant, so JavaScript can immediately respond without refreshing the page. So it also interact with the page through something called the DOM, as I mentioned earlier. But however, as the application grows larger, so manually updating the DOM elements become difficult, and there might be a lot of errors. So this is why React was created. So going into a bit into React, so what we learned in this class is, let me introduce state. So state basically stores information that changes while the application is running. So for example, when the user search for pizza, the search word is storing state. So when the state is changed, it will automatically update the user interface. And some other thing is that we commonly use are hooks. So one of the hooks I'll bring up is use effect. So unlike use state, use effect is used for how can I say that? So instead of loading restaurant data immediately, React will wait until the component renders, then executes the use effect function. So inside the user effect will usually call the fetch API to request data from the Express servers. So once data is returned, we update the state using set restaurant, for example, to update the state, and the React will automatically render the page. Since we don't have a lot of time, so let's go into the backend development part. So in this course, we build the backend using Node.js and Express. So Node is a JavaScript runtime environment. Allows JavaScript to run outside of the browser and making it possible for the server-side application, as I mentioned earlier. And so on top of the Node.js, Express is the Node.js framework, which is one of the most popular backend frameworks, and it makes backend development much easier. So one important concept I can bring up for Express is routing. So route defines what the server should do when a specific URL is requested. So for example, if the browser sends a GET request for /restaurant, for example, Express knows exactly which function to process the request. So another something we have learned this class is middleware. That's a feature of Express as well. So middleware runs in between the backend section of our code where it can something it can do is we have a middleware for validate user input, parse JSON data, check for authentications. So this makes the Express application more, I would say, modular and easier to maintain for the developers. So overall, the backend service just receives the request, performs the logic in the backend, and communicate with the back database, and returns the final response back to the front end. Yeah, let me do this. So MongoDB is just a database. So unlike traditional databases, it stores data that stores data in rows and columns. MongoDB stores information more flexible, like a JSON-like document. And some advantages of MongoDB is its flexible schema. Like different documents can contain different fields without changing the overall database structure. So since the JS objects and MongoDB documents use very similar formats, so MongoDB works very well with Node.js and Express. So let me go to a deep dive on the REST API and some of the common status code. So some of the common status codes I've listed below. During our development, we will commonly use them to see we have the correct request. Some of the common ones we see, even though we are not even developers, is the 404 one that show up in our front-end web page. Whenever the web page is down, we will see that. Going into the REST API. So there are four options. Get is to read the data, post to create the data, put to update the data, and delete is to delete the data. However, I want to mention that post not only to create the data, but it also have the functionality to update the data. And get is to read the data. So let me go into specifically on this two is that get data have nothing when going from the front end to the back end, which means that when the front end sends a get API request to the backend, it does not bring any data. It only requests the backend to search the database to grab something and return that data in response to the front end view. However, for the post, it will bring some data and then send it to the backend section, and the backend will manipulate with this database for some functionalities. So for example, if you have a register /register API, it will send the user email and the password to the backend, and backend will store that new information, which is to create the data inside of the database. Whereas if you have login, we also do a post API where we go to a /login API. We also go to the backend and also access to the database. However, it will not create any new data, but it's to look for example, the email, and then look for its matching password, hash password, using bcrypt to eventually grab what is needed and return. Here it will be like a session key or like a JW key token, but it will return something to the front end as well, to be simple. And something I learned about this that I want to mention is that this is just something we follow strictly because So for example, get functionalities, we can actually send information with the get API instead of post. And so we can also send user information such as login informations of his username, user email, and password through a get API. However, the problem with that is just that first of all, it is have the difference with is format of sending the data. So get will send its data through an URL format. So in which post will send through a body inside of its body. Uh, so body will contain a lot more information available to contain a lot more information than a URL information can contain. And also it has something to do with the security process where since the information is all exposed on the URL, everyone have access to them, and they'll have a big problem with security problems. And for post, since it's inside the body, it's a lot more secured, and this is way of doing things. Yes, it's just something I want to bring up since this is something I've learned. Uh, this is why we follow the format of get is to read the data, post is to update, create the data, etc. So let me now do the live coding section of what I have talked about specifically earlier in my presentation. So first line of code, I will import Express, which is the backend framework I will use to create the API. A constant variable app. So this app will handle the incoming HTTP request. And I'll do, already created for me, a get. For this demo, I use a simple array of restaurant data instead of connecting to the database. Let me do, sorry. Sorry, I did not explain this part. So here is basically I define a get route API called restaurant/restaurants. So when the browser visits this URL, the Express will then run this function over here. Restaurants. Let me do a very simple one. So here is the JSON. Oh, the JSON. Let me do some information I'll put in here is ID. Oh, I already created for me. Okay, and name and cuisine, for example. So this is basically the first restaurant object. But in a real world scenario, it will come from a database. But for now, I just put the JSON over here. I can create a second one of ID2, restaurant B, let's say American. So basically by doing this, the API will return two restaurants instead of one. So whatever information is in this constant restaurant. See, so at the end we will have, so which after this one, constant. After this one, we'll have a, yes, we'll have return the result, response into a JSON format restaurant. So this data will be the the standard format for the front end and backend communications. And this is where it will be sent back to the front end. See if this part is finished. Oh, and of course, we will have the app dot listen. Oh, we already have everything for me. Good. So we also have a app dot listen. Let's do the port number 3000. So this line of code is basically listens to the port number 3000, and then when we want to start the server on port 3000, we just do a localhost 3000 on the web page, and then whatever we have for our JSON, I will show up on the web page.